Clara Reed was on her knees scrubbing her father's office floor when the wealthiest rancher in Laramie County walked through the front door. She heard her father's voice shift from sick man rasp to smooth talking charm in the space of one breath. She heard him steer Cole Whitfield toward the parlor where her sister Agnes waited in pressed silk. Clara kept scrubbing. She always kept working. But Cole Whitfield never made it to that parlor. He stopped in the doorway, looked at Clara's ink-stained hands, at the ledger lying open beside her knee, at the numbers she'd circled in red, and said, "Her. That one. I want to speak with her." Her father's world stopped turning. If you want to see what an impossible moment like that changes, for everyone, subscribe to this channel right now and stay with me until the very end. And drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Clara had been awake since 4 in the morning. That was not unusual. What was unusual was finding a discrepancy in the county land records that made her set down her coffee cup so carefully it didn't make a sound, the way a person moves when they're afraid that any sudden noise might shatter something that can't be put back together. She'd been cross-referencing her father's copies of the Laramie County deed filings against the transfer dates recorded in the territorial ledger. It was the kind of work nobody asked her to do. Nobody asked Clara Reed to do much of anything except keep the office running, keep the accounts balanced, keep the creditors patient, keep her father's law practice from collapsing entirely now that Howard Reed's right hand barely worked and his words came out slow and thick from the stroke he'd had in January. Her sister Agnes handled the social obligations. Agnes met clients in the front parlor. Agnes poured coffee and smiled and made men feel important enough to trust the Reed name with their legal business. Agnes was 22 years old and had their mother's dark eyes and the kind of beauty that made men straighten their collars without realizing they were doing it. Clara was 26. She had ink on her fingers on her best days and ink on her face on her worst ones. She had a mind that ran numbers the way other women ran needlework, automatically, completely, finding the pattern before she'd consciously decided to look for one. She had 6 years of experience quietly catching the errors that would have ruined her father's clients before he knew they were errors. She had no parlor, no silk dress, and no one in Laramie who would have called her beautiful. She had, however, just found something in the deed filings that made her blood go cold. 3 transfer dates on 3 separate parcels of land, all filed through the county records office, all notarized by Burton Graves. The filing dates in her father's copies matched perfectly. But the territorial ledger, which used a different notation system that nobody but Clara had ever bothered to learn, showed those same parcels recorded 11 days earlier than the notarized dates. 11 days exactly. Same gap, 3 times. On 3 parcels that all sat along the projected route of the Union Pacific's northwestern expansion. Clara sat back from the desk and looked at what she'd circled in red pencil. Someone had recorded the ownership of those parcels before the sales were officially filed. Someone had known where the railroad was going before the announcement was public. And someone had made sure the paperwork showed a different story. She was still staring at those circled numbers when she heard the front door open. She heard her father's shuffling step from the back room, where he slept now, because the stairs had become impossible. She heard him reach the front hallway and stop. And then she heard his voice take on that particular quality, the one he only used when someone important had walked in. "Mr. Whitfield." Her father's words came easier when he was focused. "This is an unexpected honor, sir. Please, come in. My daughter Agnes will see to you in the parlor." "I appreciate that, Mr. Reed." The voice was low and even, the voice of a man who didn't raise it to be heard. "But I'm not here for parlor conversation. I have some questions about a deed filing I need a qualified eye to look at." Of course. Let me just—" "I'll wait here," Clara heard her father hesitate. She knew that hesitation intimately. It was the sound of a man recalculating, rearranging, trying to figure out how to redirect something without appearing to redirect it. "Clara," her father called, "bring the Reed versus Morrison file to the front." That was not a real file. Clara knew every file in this office. Howard Reed was buying himself time to maneuver Agnes into position. She closed the territorial ledger, tucked it under her arm, and walked out of the back office into the front hallway. Cole Whitfield was standing by the door with his hat in his hands. He was taller than she'd expected, lean in the way men get when they spend more time working than eating, with dark eyes that moved across the room the way a former lawman's eyes do, cataloging exits and details before settling on a face. He looked at her father first. Then he looked at Clara. His gaze dropped to the ledger under her arm, to the red pencil still in her hand, to the ink stains she hadn't had time to wash off. He didn't look at Agnes, who had appeared silently in the parlor doorway behind him in her pressed silk. "You're the one who keeps the books," Cole Whitfield said to Clara. It was not a question. "I am." "Then you're the one I need to talk to." Her father moved between them with surprising speed for a man with a bad leg. "Mr. Whitfield, my daughter Clara handles clerical matters, but for something requiring legal expertise, my Agnes has been trained in—" "With respect, Mr. Reed." Cole Whitfield did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I need someone who can read a deed filing and tell me if the numbers are right. Is that your daughter, or isn't it?" The silence in the hallway lasted 3 full seconds. "It's me," Clara said. Her father turned and looked at her with an expression she recognized. It was the look that said she had once again done the wrong thing by doing exactly what she was actually capable of doing. She looked back at him steadily and said nothing else. Cole Whitfield pulled a folded document from inside his vest and held it out to her. "I bought a parcel of land 6 months ago from a man named Patterson. He had a deed, properly notarized by the county clerk. I paid $400. Last week, I was informed that the same parcel was sold to a railroad consortium 2 months before I bought it, with documentation showing a transfer date that predates my purchase." He paused. "I'd like to know which set of documents is lying." Clara took the deed from his hand and unfolded it. Her eyes moved down the page, stopped at the notary stamp, moved to the transfer date, moved to the recording number in the lower right corner. She felt the back of her neck go tight. The recording number was in the same sequence as the 3 parcels she'd been looking at for the past 3 hours. Burton Graves's sequence. "Come into the back office," she said. "Clara!" Her father's voice carried a warning she knew the shape of. "Father?" She did not look at him. "Mr. Whitfield needs help I can actually give him." She walked back toward the office without waiting to see if Cole Whitfield followed. He did. She heard his boots on the floor behind her, steady and unhurried. Agnes said nothing from the parlor doorway. When Clara passed, she caught a glimpse of her sister's face. Not angry, not wounded. Something more careful than either of those things. Something that looked almost like recognition. Clara laid Cole Whitfield's deed on the desk beside the territorial ledger. She opened the ledger to the page she'd bookmarked with a strip of paper. She placed the 2 documents side by side and stood back. "Look at this recording number," she said, pointing to his deed. "And this one." She pointed to the ledger. "They're in the same numerical sequence. County clerk records are supposed to be filed in the order they're received. These 2 documents were filed 11 days apart, according to the official dates." She looked up at him. "But they're sequential. They were recorded at the same time." Cole Whitfield leaned over the desk and looked at the numbers without touching anything. She noticed that. He knew how to look at evidence without disturbing it. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means someone filed your deed and the consortium deed at the same sitting and gave them different official dates afterward. Your deed was backdated to make it look like you bought the property legitimately. The consortium's deed was also backdated to a date before yours." She kept her voice flat and factual, because if she let any emotion into it, she wasn't sure she could control which emotion came out. "Someone used the county records office to run a title fraud scheme. They sold the same land twice and made the paperwork say whatever they needed it to say." Cole Whitfield straightened up slowly. "You're sure?" "I've been looking at 3 other parcels with the same pattern since 4 this morning. You're the 4th. She pointed to the red circles in the ledger. "All 4 parcels sit along the projected Union Pacific route. All 4 were sold to outside investors in the last 18 months. All 4 have recording numbers that don't match their official filing dates." She paused. "Whoever did this knew where the railroad was going before it was public." "That information would have come through the Territorial Land Office," Cole said quietly. "Or through the county clerk's office. The county clerk gets advance notice of any land survey requests from the railroad. It's standard procedure." She looked at him. "Burton Graves has been the county land records clerk for 7 years." The room was very quiet. "How long have you known about this?" Cole asked. 3 hours. "Have you told anyone?" "You're the first person who walked in here with a document that matched the pattern." She folded her arms across her chest. "And you came looking for exactly this, didn't you? You already suspected something was wrong before you walked in here." Cole Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. She'd learned, over years of catching things other people missed, to recognize the expression of a man deciding how honest to be. "I used to work for Pinkerton," he said. "I know." She'd heard his name around Laramie. Everyone knew Cole Whitfield had come back from somewhere difficult and bought the Harmon Creek property on the south edge of town. Not everyone knew the Pinkerton history, but Clara Reed read every legal document that came through this office, and she had a long memory. "You investigated land fraud cases for 7 years before you quit." "I quit because my supervisors told me to close a case that wasn't closed." His voice didn't change. "I'm not with Pinkerton anymore. Haven't been for 2 years." "But you still recognize the pattern when you see it." "So do you," he said. "And you're a bookkeeper in your father's law office." "I'm a bookkeeper in my father's law office who has been maintaining the county deed filing copies for 6 years, she said, "which means I have access to every parcel transfer recorded in Laramie County since 1872. And I have cross-reference files that nobody else in this territory has thought to keep." She held his gaze. "Mr. Graves has been very careful. But he's been careful in a way that assumes nobody is doing exactly what I've been doing." Cole Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Reed, I need your help." "You need my files," she corrected him. "I need both." Her father appeared in the doorway. His face had gone through several colors in the past 10 minutes, and had settled on a kind of resigned fury. "Mr. Whitfield, I don't know what my daughter has been telling you, but I assure you that any legal matter of this significance should be handled through proper—" "Mr. Reed." Cole Whitfield turned and looked at Howard Reed with a patience that wasn't entirely kind. "Your daughter has just shown me evidence of a county-level land fraud scheme that involves at least 4 parcels and could involve dozens more. She identified the methodology, matched the documentation, and named the likely source in under 10 minutes of looking at one new piece of evidence." He paused. "I don't think she's out of her depth. I think she's the most qualified person in this room." Howard Reed opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Clara with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, something complicated and quiet that she didn't know how to interpret and didn't have time to examine. "There's another problem," Clara said, because there was, and because she'd learned that deferring problems never made them smaller. "If Burton Graves finds out someone is looking at these records, he has the authority to refile, relabel, or selectively destroy county documentation. He controls the physical ledgers. Everything I have is copies. Copies are admissible in court, but only if they can be matched to originals that still exist." She looked at Cole. "We need to access the original county records before he knows anyone is looking." "Can you get us access to the county records office?" "Not legitimately. Not without going through Graves." "Then we need Judge Calloway to issue an emergency preservation order," Cole said. "Which means we need to walk into the judge's office today with enough to make the case." "I have enough," Clara said. "Then we leave in an hour." Her father took a step forward. "Now hold on just a moment. Clara is not going anywhere with—" "Father." Clara turned to face Howard Reed fully, for the first time since Cole Whitfield had walked in. Her voice was quiet. It had always been quiet. She'd learned young that quiet was more useful than loud. "I found something this morning that is bigger than anything this office has ever touched. If we handle it correctly, if we build the case properly, and get it in front of Judge Calloway before Graves has any reason to suspect, we have a chance to bring this to a resolution that matters." She held her father's gaze. "I am going to do this work. You can either support that, or stand in the hallway and watch me leave. But I am doing it, either way." Howard Reed looked at his daughter, the daughter who had been running his practice for 18 months while he relearned how to hold a pen. The daughter who woke at 4 a.m. to catch errors that would have destroyed his clients. The daughter he sent to the back when wealthy men came through the front door. He said nothing. Cole Whitfield picked up his hat from the corner of the desk where he'd set it. "I have a horse and a wagon outside. We can carry your files. I'll need an hour to organize the cross-reference documents. They need to be in the right order before we present them, or they'll look like conjecture instead of pattern evidence." She began pulling files from the cabinet beside her desk, moving with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was, because she had put everything exactly where it was. "Do you have a way to get an emergency appointment with the judge?" "Tom Anker owes me a conversation," Cole said. "He's deputy to the marshal's office. If I tell him what we found, he can get us in front of Calloway before noon." "You trust Anker?" "I trust that he's not smart enough to be in on a scheme this complicated," Cole said. "Which, right now, is the same thing." Clara almost smiled. Almost. She pulled the territorial ledger from the desk, added it to the growing stack in her arms, and turned around to find Cole Whitfield watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not the way men usually looked at her, through her, past her, over her shoulder toward whatever more interesting thing existed behind. He was watching the way she moved, the way she organized, the way she was already 3 steps ahead in a situation she'd been handed 45 minutes ago. "You've been doing this kind of work for a long time," he said. It wasn't flattery. It was an observation, the same way he'd said she was the one who kept the books, factual and direct. 6 years, she said, and nobody outside this office knows what you can do. Nobody outside this office has asked. He nodded, as if that answered something he'd been trying to work out. Then he held out his hands for the files. She looked at his hands for a moment, calloused, steady, the hands of someone who'd carried heavy things for a long time. She handed him half the stack. Agnes appeared in the doorway as they were carrying the files toward the front of the office. She looked at the stack of documents, at Cole Whitfield carrying half of it without being asked, at the purposeful set of Clara's shoulders. Agnes Reed had spent her entire life being the one people looked at, This was, Clara realized, probably the first time her sister had watched someone look past her entirely and not known what to do about it. "You found something," Agnes said quietly. "In the ledgers. You found something serious." "Yes." "Is the office in danger?" Clara paused. "If we do this right, the opposite." She looked at her sister, really looked, the way she rarely let herself, because looking too long at Agnes's easy beauty and their father's clear preference had always cost her more than she could afford. "I'll explain when I get back." Agnes nodded slowly. Something moved across her face that Clara couldn't read in the time she had. Then Agnes stepped aside. Clara walked past her father without looking at him. She heard him call her name once, from behind, with that particular rasp that meant he was frightened and trying to disguise it as authority. She kept walking. The morning air outside hit her like cold water, clean and sharp. Cole Whitfield was already loading files into the wagon bed, stacking them with the careful attention of a man who understood that the order of things mattered. "You should know something," Clara said, stopping beside the wagon. "If Graves finds out what I've been doing, he has connections to 3 of the county commissioners. He can make my father's copies legally questionable. He can come after this office." "I know. I'm not telling you that to back out," she said. "I'm telling you so you understand what we're working against." Cole Whitfield looked up from the files. "Miss Reed, I walked away from a 7-year career because I was told to let a guilty man go. I bought a piece of land that turns out to have a fraudulent deed, and I walked into a law office this morning looking for someone who could read the evidence I couldn't prove alone." He settled the last file into the wagon bed and straightened up. "You have 6 years of documentation that nobody else knew existed. I have contacts and legal standing I haven't used in 2 years. He picked up the reins. "Between the 2 of us, Burton Graves has a problem." Clara climbed up onto the wagon seat without waiting for help. Her hands were steady. Her mind was running the documentation sequence in order, building the presentation for Judge Calloway, calculating which pieces of evidence needed to be shown first, and which ones landed hardest as follow-through. She did not look back at the office as they pulled away from the curb. She was already working. Judge Calloway's office smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. The particular combination of a man who had been making decisions in the same chair for 20 years and had stopped noticing what surrounded him. He was 63, heavy-set, with a white mustache that he touched when he was thinking, and a reputation for being difficult to impress and impossible to fool. He looked at the stack of documents Clara laid across his desk, without touching them. "Tom tells me this is urgent," he said. "It is," Cole said. "Tom also tells me the person who put this together is a bookkeeper." Calloway looked at Clara with a particular expression of a man who was willing to be proven wrong, but needed to be shown, not told. "Miss Reed." "Yes, sir." "Walk me through it." Clara had organized the documents in the wagon on the way over, rearranging the sequence twice in her head before they'd gone 3 blocks. She knew exactly how to build this. Not the way a lawyer would build it, with precedent and argument, but the way an accountant builds it, number by number, date by date, pattern emerging from repetition until the only possible conclusion was the one she'd already reached. She started with Cole's deed. She placed it on the desk, smoothed it flat, and pointed to the recording number in the lower right corner. Then she placed the territorial ledger open beside it, and pointed to the same sequence. Then she placed the 3 other parcels she'd identified, one at a time, each with its matching ledger entry, each with the 11-day discrepancy circled in red. She did not editorialize. She did not explain what it meant before she'd shown what it was. She let the numbers speak in the order they needed to speak. Calloway touched his mustache twice during the presentation. 3 times when she showed him the railroad survey request that had gone through the county clerk's office 4 months before the first fraudulent deed was filed. When she finished, the desk was covered in documents, arranged in a grid that showed, as plainly as anything Clara had ever constructed, that Burton Graves had used his position as county land records clerk to run a systematic title fraud operation across at least 4 parcels of high-value land along the Union Pacific corridor. The room was quiet for a moment. "How long did it take you to find this?" Calloway asked. "The pattern took about 3 hours once I had the right cross-reference. I've been maintaining copies of the county deed filings for 6 years, so the baseline data was already organized." She kept her voice even. "If I'd had reason to look for this specific discrepancy earlier, I would have found it earlier." "And Graves doesn't know you've been keeping these copies?" "No, it's not something anyone asked me to do. I did it because incomplete records create liability for my father's clients." She paused. "I don't think Mr. Graves has ever considered the possibility that someone outside his office was maintaining a parallel record set." Calloway looked at Cole. "You've seen fraud cases like this before." "Similar structure," Cole said. "Railroad expansion creates a narrow window where land values are predictable to anyone with inside information, but still officially unannounced. Someone in the right position can buy cheap, resell at inflated prices to outside investors, and cover the paper trail by controlling the official record." He leaned forward slightly. "The scale here is consistent with what I've seen. The methodology is more sophisticated than most because Graves has had years to refine it, but the fundamental weakness is the same. He had to create 2 sets of facts, and eventually, the numbers don't match." "And Miss Reed's cross-reference files are the proof of that mismatch?" "Yes, sir," Clara said. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the documents spread across his desk with the expression of a man who had hoped his county was running cleaner than it was, and had just been informed otherwise. Then he straightened in his chair. "I'm going to issue an emergency preservation order for the original county deed ledgers. That means Graves cannot remove, refile, or destroy any documentation in the county records office until this is investigated." He looked at Clara. "I'm also going to need your cross-reference files entered into the court record. All of them. Can you have the full set prepared by tomorrow morning?" "I can have them prepared by tonight," Clara said. Calloway almost smiled. "I'll need a sworn statement from you as well, describing your record-keeping methodology, the discrepancies you identified, and how you came to find them." He looked at Cole. "And from you, regarding the fraudulent deed you purchased." "Understood," Cole said. "Tom?" Calloway looked at the deputy marshal, who had been standing by the door with the expression of a man trying to keep up with the conversation that was moving faster than he'd expected. "I want 2 men on the county records office before Graves arrives for work tomorrow morning. Nobody goes in or out without authorization until the preservation order is in effect." "Yes, sir," Tom Anker said. He looked at Clara with something that had shifted considerably from the skepticism he'd brought through the door. Not quite respect yet, but the beginning of it. They walked out of the judge's office into the midday glare of Laramie's main street. Clara stopped on the boardwalk and looked at the county records office 3 buildings down, its windows blank and ordinary in the afternoon light. She thought about Burton Graves sitting behind his desk in there right now, filing papers, notarizing documents, doing the small bureaucratic work of a man who believed he'd built himself something untouchable. "He'll know by morning," she said. "Yes," Cole said. "When he finds out what's happening, his first move will be to discredit the source." She looked at Cole steadily. "That means me. He'll argue that my copies are forgeries, that I created the discrepancies myself, that a woman keeping unofficial records outside the scope of her employment is not a reliable evidentiary source. That argument fails the moment we match your copies against the originals," Cole said, "which is why the preservation order matters. He can't touch the originals now." I know that. You know that. She kept her voice level. But there are 12 hours between now and tomorrow morning, and Burton Graves has friends in this town who'll hear something is happening before the preservation order is officially in effect. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is there somewhere you can put your original files tonight that isn't your father's office?" Clara thought about that. Her first instinct was Ruth Harmon's boarding house, which was 3 blocks off the main street and run by a woman who had the discretion of a priest and the memory of a judge. But she needed somewhere the files could be physically secured, not just socially protected. "The church," she said. "Reverend Miles keeps a locked record cabinet for confidential parish documents. He's been a client of my father's for 12 years, and he is the only person in this town I would trust with something like this, because he genuinely does not care about money or politics." "Can you get there before dark?" "I can get there in 20 minutes. Tom Anker had caught up to them on the boardwalk. He was straightening his hat with the slightly over-careful gesture of a young man trying to project more authority than he currently felt. "Miss Reed," he said, "for what it's worth, I've been in that county records office a dozen times and never noticed anything wrong with those filings." "You weren't looking for it," Clara said. It wasn't unkind. Nobody was. "I'm looking for it now." He glanced at Cole. "I'll have men on the records office by 7 tonight, before Graves finishes his supper." He walked back toward the marshal's office with the purposeful stride of a man who had just been handed a reason to matter. Clara and Cole stood on the boardwalk together for a moment, in the particular silence of 2 people who have just done something that cannot be undone. "You should eat something," Cole said. She blinked. The statement was so practical and so unexpected that she almost didn't know what to do with it. "I'm fine. You've been awake since 4 in the morning, and you haven't eaten anything since before that." His voice was not concerned in a fussy way. It was the voice of a man who noticed things and said them directly. "We have 12 hours before this becomes a different kind of problem. You should eat something before it does." Clara looked at him. He was watching the street, not her. His eyes moving the way they'd moved in the records office. Cataloging, measuring, staying aware of everything around him without appearing to be doing so. It was a professional habit, she recognized, the kind that never fully stopped even when the profession was gone. "There's a place on 2nd Street, she said. "They serve lunch until 2. They walked without discussing it, which was, Clara thought, the most natural thing that had happened all day. Ruth Harmon's boarding house was visible from the window of the lunch counter, its painted signs swinging in the afternoon wind. Clara watched it while she drank her coffee and thought about the 12 hours ahead. Cole ate without apparent urgency and without making conversation for the sake of filling silence, which she found unexpectedly comfortable. "Why did you come to my father's office specifically?" she asked when the coffee was half gone. "You had a fraudulent deed. You could have gone to the marshal's office directly." "I did, 8 weeks ago." He set down his fork. "Tom Anker told me it was a civil matter and referred me to a land attorney in Cheyenne. The Cheyenne attorney told me the documentation looked legitimate and suggested I'd misread the situation." He looked at her steadily. "I knew the documentation didn't look legitimate. I knew what I was seeing. But knowing and proving are different things. And I needed someone who could read the county filing system the way I read a case file." He paused. "I asked Ruth Harmon, who kept the deed records for this county. She told me about your father's office. She told me about you specifically." "Ruth Harmon told you about me?" "She said, and I am repeating this exactly, Howard Reed's youngest daughter has been running that office since before his stroke, and she knows those land filings better than the county clerk does. But nobody will ask her because they see Howard Reed's bookkeeper instead of the sharpest legal mind in Laramie County." He picked up his coffee. "I decided to find out if she was right." Clara was quiet for a moment. She's been my father's client since 1869, she said finally. She's also not wrong about things, Cole said. Clara thought about the 6 years she'd spent in that back office, the files she'd organized, the errors she'd caught, the patterns she'd identified in document after document, while her father handled the front room and her sister handled the clients. And nobody asked what Clara was finding because nobody considered that she was finding anything at all. She thought about the stack of cross-reference files sitting in the wagon outside. Years of invisible work that had turned out to be the one thing that could break a fraud case that had already defeated a marshal's office and a Cheyenne attorney. She thought about Burton Graves, sitting in his office 3 blocks away, and the 11-day gap in his records that he'd never imagined anyone would find. "He's going to come after my father's practice," she said. "Even if we prove everything. Even if the case is airtight. He has enough influence with the county commissioners that he can make things difficult for any law office that brought this against him." "Probably," Cole said. "Is that a reason to stop?" She looked across the table at him. He was watching her with that same direct, unadorned attention she'd noticed in her father's office. Not the attention of a man who was looking at a woman, but the attention of a man who was looking at a person he was trying to accurately assess. "No," she said. "It's a reason to do it right." He nodded, as if that was the answer he'd already calculated. They went to the church first. Reverend Miles was a small, dry-voiced man who had survived 20 years in Wyoming territory by being absolutely unintimidated by anything that wasn't a theological question. He listened to Clara's explanation, looked at the stack of files, looked at Cole Whitfield standing behind her with his hat in his hands, and said, "Second drawer on the left. I'll lock it myself when you're done." He did not ask a single question about the content of the files. It took 40 minutes to transfer everything to the church cabinet and document what was where. Cole held files while Clara organized them, handing each one over in the order she asked for, without needing to be told twice. She noticed that. The way he followed her lead in her domain as naturally as she'd follow his in his. When they came back out onto the church steps, the afternoon was starting to lean toward evening. The light had gone amber, and long across the street and somewhere down the block, a horse was complaining about something with considerable feeling. "I need to go back to the office," Clara said. "I have to prepare the sworn statement for Calloway tonight." "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "Miss Reed." He said it the same way he said everything. No particular inflection, no performance. "Graves has had dealings with your father's practice for years. He knows that office. When he finds out what's happening, which will be sometime in the next 12 hours, the first place he'll go is your father's records." He looked at her. "I'd rather be there." Clara thought about arguing. She thought about the particular habit she'd built over 6 years of handling everything alone, because asking for help meant admitting she needed it. And admitting she needed it meant confirming everyone's unspoken belief that she couldn't manage without someone else's authority behind her. She looked at Cole Whitfield, who had carried half her files without being asked, who had followed her lead in the judge's office, who had quoted Ruth Harmon's assessment of her without softening it or adding qualifiers. "All right," she said. They walked back toward the office in the amber evening light, and Clara was already composing the sworn statement in her head, lining up the facts in the order they needed to appear, building the structure of what came next with the same methodical precision she'd brought to everything she'd ever done alone. The difference was that this time, someone was walking beside her who already knew what she was capable of. She didn't know yet what to do with that, but she kept walking. When they turned the corner onto the street where her father's office sat, Clara stopped. Agnes was standing on the front step with her arms crossed and an expression Clara had never seen on her face. Not distress, not performance, not the careful social management Agnes used for everything difficult. Just plain, undisguised fear. "You need to come inside," Agnes said. "Right now. Both of you." "What happened?" Clara said. Agnes looked past her at Cole, then back at Clara, and the fear on her face sharpened into something more specific. "Burton Graves came by an hour ago," she said. "He sat with Father for 20 minutes. I couldn't hear everything." She paused. "But I heard him say your name, Clara. He said it the way men say something they're planning to get rid of." Clara moved past her sister and into the office without breaking stride. Her father was sitting behind his desk with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. The posture of a man who has just been told something he is trying to decide how to carry. He looked up when she came in, and something moved across his face that she couldn't immediately name. Guilt, maybe. Or the particular shame of a man who has spent years underestimating someone and has just been shown the cost of it. "He knows," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "He came by to discuss a filing matter," her father said. His words came slower in the evenings, the strokes work, and right now each one arrived with the weight of what he wasn't saying behind it. "He asked about your cross-reference files. He knew you kept them. He's known for some time, apparently." "What did you tell him?" Howard Reed's hands pressed harder against the desk. "I told him I didn't know what he was referring to." Clara looked at her father. He did not look away. "He didn't believe you," she said. "No." A pause. He said that if any unofficial documentation from this office were to surface in connection with a legal matter involving his department, he would have grounds to challenge the integrity of our entire filing system. He said the county commissioners would have no choice but to review our license to practice. Her father's jaw tightened. He said it pleasantly, the way a man says something pleasant when what he means is a threat. Cole Whitfield had come in behind Clara and was standing near the door. Agnes had followed and was standing with her back against the wall beside the window, watching her father with an expression Clara had never seen on her sister's face. Focused, hard, stripped of its usual performance. "He came here because he already knows about the judge," Cole said. It was not a question either. "How would he know that already?" Agnes said. "You were only there this morning." "He has someone in the marshal's office," Cole said, "or close enough to it. Tom Anker is honest, but honest men talk to their wives, their friends, people they trust. Word moves fast in a town this size." He looked at Clara. "He's not going to wait for the preservation order. He came here to put your father on notice before it's in effect. He wants Howard Reed scared enough to pull the documentation back voluntarily." "The documentation is already at the church," Clara said. Cole nodded once. "Then he can't get to it through your father." "He doesn't know that yet." "No," Cole said, "which gives us until he figures it out." Howard Reed looked between his daughter and Cole Whitfield with the expression of a man watching a conversation happen at a speed and altitude he was struggling to reach. "What exactly have you two set in motion today?" he said carefully. Clara told him. She laid it out the same way she'd laid it out for Judge Calloway. Methodical, sequential, the numbers first and the conclusion after. She watched her father's face as she talked. Watched him move from confusion to recognition, to something that looked, slowly and painfully, like understanding. When she finished, the office was very quiet. "You've been keeping parallel records for 6 years, her father said. "Yes." "And you never told me." "You never asked what I was doing." She said it without anger. It was simply true, and they were past the point where softening it served any purpose. "I did it because it was the right way to protect our clients. I did it because incomplete records create liability. I did it because it was the responsible thing to do. She looked at him steadily. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd consider it worth your attention. Howard Reed was quiet for a long moment. His right hand, the one that had never fully come back from the stroke, moved slightly on the desk surface in the involuntary way it sometimes did when he was trying to hold something still inside himself. Clara, he said finally. His voice had gone rough. I owe you a conversation that is long overdue, but not tonight. No, she agreed. Not tonight. Agnes made a small sound from beside the window. Not a word, just a sound, the kind a person makes when something they've been holding shifts and settles differently. Clara glanced at her sister. Agnes was looking at their father with an expression that Clara recognized, because she'd worn it herself for years. The expression of someone who has just understood something they should have understood much sooner, and is sitting with the discomfort of that. What do you need from us? Agnes said. She was looking at Clara when she said it. The question landed differently than anything Agnes had said to her in years, because it assumed that Clara was the one who knew, and that Agnes's role was to support rather than to direct. Clara wasn't sure her sister fully realized she'd said it that way. I need to write the sworn statement for Judge Calloway tonight, Clara said, and I need someone to stay in this office while I do it. She looked at her father. If Graves comes back or sends someone, I need to know. I'll stay, Agnes said immediately. Cole said, I'll send word to Tom Anker that Graves has already made contact with your father's office. That information changes the urgency of the timeline. He looked at Howard Reed. Mr. Reed, if anyone comes to this office tonight asking about your daughter's records, your filing system, or anything connected to the county land records, you know nothing. You've been unwell. Your bookkeeper manages those matters independently, and you are not in a position to speak to specifics. Her father looked at Cole for a moment. You were Pinkerton, he said. I was. And now you're a rancher with a fraudulent deed and my daughter's cross-reference files. That's about right. Howard Reed made a sound that might have been something close to a rueful laugh. All right, Mr. Whitfield. I know nothing. Clara settled at her desk and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. The sworn statement had been organizing itself in her head for the past 3 hours, and now she simply had to put it down in the right order. She wrote the way she always worked, quietly, completely, without stopping to second-guess the structure, because the structure was already correct before she began. Cole sat in the chair across from her desk. He did not talk. He did not hover. He read through the copies of the matching deed filings she'd set aside for the court record, going through them with the same systematic attention he'd brought to everything else, making small notes in the margin of his own copy, in a handwriting that was cramped and precise. Agnes made coffee. She brought a cup to Clara without being asked, set it beside the inkwell without disturbing anything on the desk, and went back to the front of the office without comment. It was such a small thing. Clara felt it anyway. An hour into the statement, Cole looked up from his documents. There's something I haven't told you, he said. Clara kept writing. Tell me. The parcel I bought from Patterson. Patterson bought it from a man named Decker 18 months ago. Decker was a Union Pacific surveyor who left the company and left Laramie in a considerable hurry about 6 months after the sale. He set down his pen. I've been trying to find Decker for 2 months. Nobody in this county seems to know where he went. Clara stopped writing. A Union Pacific surveyor, she said, who sold a parcel along the projected railroad route to a private buyer at below market price, then disappeared. Cole's voice was even. Graves couldn't have known the specific route without inside information from the railroad company. He could have estimated based on the terrain surveys, but the precision of which parcels he targeted suggests he had specific knowledge. Decker was his source, Clara said. That's what I think. Which means there's someone inside Union Pacific who is also profiting from this. And it means Graves has more protection than just the county commissioners. He paused. If any of this connects back to Union Pacific interests, the pressure on Judge Calloway to make this go away will be significant. Clara looked at him across the desk. The lamp between them threw light and shadow in equal measure, and she thought about how differently this day had gone from every other day she'd sat at this desk in this office, cross-referencing documents that nobody asked her about, for clients who never knew she'd saved them. How significant, she said. Significant enough that we need to move faster than I planned, Cole said. The preservation order alone isn't enough. We need someone who can take this beyond the county level. A territorial judge, or better, a federal land commissioner. That takes time we may not have. I know someone, Cole said. A federal land agent named Briggs, who's been working the Wyoming Territory for 3 years. I worked 2 cases with him when I was with Pinkerton. He's honest, he's methodical, and he has the authority to freeze county records independently of the local courts. He looked at her steadily. But to bring him in, I have to send a wire tonight, and he has to trust that what I'm sending him is real. Which means he needs to hear your name attached to this. My name means nothing to a federal agent. It will mean something when I tell him you've maintained 6 years of parallel deed filings that document a county-level fraud scheme nobody else caught. Cole's voice didn't change. It never seemed to change. Briggs respects thoroughness more than credentials. Your methodology is the credential. Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about what it meant to put her name on something that was going to draw the attention of people with far more power than Burton Graves. She thought about the signed statements, the court records. The moment when Clara Reed's name went from something written in small letters on a bookkeeper's filing system to something written in large letters on a federal investigation. She thought about the 11-day gap in Burton Graves's records. 3 years of careful, systematic fraud. Families who'd bought land and lost money on fraudulent titles. Cole Whitfield, who'd paid $400 for a deed that wasn't worth the paper it was notarized on. Send the wire, she said. Something shifted in Cole's expression, just slightly, just enough that she noticed it. I'll go to the telegraph office now, he said. He stood, put his hat on, and paused at the desk. The statement you're writing, make sure you include the methodology you used to identify the cross-reference system. Briggs will want to understand exactly how you found what you found. He looked at her directly. Not because he'll doubt it, because he'll need to defend it against someone who will. I know, she said. He left. The office was quieter without him. Not uncomfortably so, but noticeably. Clara sat with that for a moment before she picked up her pen. Agnes appeared in the doorway between the front room and the back office. She was holding her own coffee cup in both hands, the way she always did when she was working through something and hadn't finished working through it yet. He looks at you the way men usually look at me, she said. Clara did not look up from the page. Agnes. I'm not saying it to be difficult. Agnes moved into the room and sat in the chair Cole had vacated, curling her feet up beneath her in the unconscious way she'd always sat when it was just the 2 of them and no one was watching. I'm saying it because I want to understand how I've been not seeing it. Seeing what? You. Agnes's voice was quiet and direct in a way that Clara was not accustomed to hearing from her. I've been in the front room for 6 years, pouring coffee and making clients feel comfortable, and doing everything Father asked me to do. And you've been back here, building something that turns out to be the most important thing this office has ever produced. And I walk past that door every single day, and never once asked what you were doing. She paused. Father didn't either. No, Clara said. I knew you were smarter than me, Agnes said. I knew it when we were children. I knew it when Mother was still alive. I think I decided somewhere along the way that being smarter was your thing, and being useful in the front room was my thing, and I didn't look too hard at whether that arrangement was fair. Clara set down her pen. She looked at her sister, really looked, the way she rarely allowed herself, because looking too long at the particular ease Agnes moved through the world with had always cost her something she couldn't afford to spend. You weren't wrong that it was unfair, Clara said. But Agnes, what Father did with it, that was his choice, not yours. You didn't make him send me to the back room. I didn't stop him either. You were 22 years old and living in your father's house, Clara said. Neither did I, for 6 years. I just found a different way to make myself matter in the space I was given. She picked up her pen again. That's not noble. That's survival. Agnes looked at her for a long moment. The man Graves said he was going to arrange for me to marry, she said. Mr. Patterson. Clara's hand stilled. Patterson is the man who sold Cole Whitfield the fraudulent deed, she said carefully. I know. I heard enough of what you told Father. Agnes's expression didn't waver. I want you to know that I never agreed to it. Father mentioned it once, and I told him I wouldn't discuss it. He didn't push, because he still needed me in the front room. She looked down at her cup. But he would have pushed eventually. If things had gotten worse with the creditors, he would have pushed. Clara thought about that. About the particular kind of trap that looked like a parlor and silk dresses, and being the daughter everyone could see. Agnes, she said, when this is over, when whatever happens with Graves happens, and the office is still standing, or it isn't, we need to have a different conversation about how this place runs. I know, Agnes said. I want that conversation. She looked up. I also want to learn what you've been doing in this office, the actual work, the filings and the cross-references and whatever it is that means you could build a federal case in a single day. She said it without performance, without charm, without any of the social machinery she usually deployed. Just plainly. Will you teach me? Clara looked at her sister for a long moment. Yes, she said. Agnes nodded. She uncurled from the chair and went back to the front room, and Clara listened to her sister moving through the space with a different quality of footstep than she'd ever noticed before. Less like someone who owned the room, and more like someone who was figuring out what they actually wanted from it. Clara went back to the sworn statement. She was on the 3rd page when she heard the front door open. Her pen stopped moving. She heard Agnes's voice, calm and even. The office is closed for the evening, sir. And then a man's voice that she did not recognize, lower and more deliberate, saying something she couldn't make out. Then Agnes said, clearly and without inflection, I'm afraid I don't know what files you're referring to. My sister manages all the filing matters, and she isn't here this evening. A pause. The door closed. Agnes appeared in the doorway, her face composed. A man I've never seen before. He said he was a clerk from the county records office, and he needed to verify some filing copies. He specifically asked about the cross-reference records. She met Clara's eyes. I told him you weren't here. He said he'd come back. Clara looked at her sister. He won't come back tonight, Clara said. Graves will wait to see if the preservation order stops him first. If it does, he'll try another approach. She stood and picked up the sworn statement pages, tapping them even against the desk. If it doesn't, coming after the files directly is the next move. And if someone comes back while you're not here? You know nothing, Clara said. You manage the front room. Your sister handles the filings. You couldn't access them if you wanted to. She looked at Agnes steadily. Can you do that? I've been managing what people see and don't see in this office for 6 years, Agnes said. There was something dry and clear in her voice that Clara hadn't heard before. I think I can manage one conversation. The front door opened again before either of them could speak. Cole Whitfield came back in with his hat pushed back slightly, and the particular expression of a man who has just gotten news that rearranges the morning's plans. I sent the wire to Briggs, he said, but there's something else. He looked at Clara directly. The telegraph operator told me there was a wire sent from Laramie to Cheyenne this afternoon. About 3 hours after we left Judge Calloway's office, he paused. It was sent from the county records office, addressed to the Union Pacific Regional Land Office. The three of them stood in the quiet of the office, and Clara felt the specific weight of what that meant settle into the room like weather. Graves wasn't just running a county fraud scheme. He was already telling his partners what was coming. Clara sat down, not because her legs gave out, not because the news had broken something in her, but because she needed to think, and she thought better when she was still. She set the sworn statement pages on the desk and pressed both hands flat against them and looked at the wall in front of her and let the new information rearrange everything she'd built in her head over the past 16 hours. Graves had sent a wire to Union Pacific, which meant Union Pacific knew that someone in Laramie had connected the deed filings to the railroad corridor, which meant that whoever at Union Pacific had been feeding Graves the survey route information, whoever had been the other half of the scheme for however many years it had been running, now knew their name was potentially attached to a federal fraud case. "How much does Union Pacific know?" she said. "About what we have?" "Only what Graves told them," Cole said, "which is probably that someone has matched the filing dates and is taking it to the county courts." He pulled the chair Agnes had vacated and sat down across from her. "He won't have told them about your cross-reference system. He doesn't know the full scope of what you have." "He knows enough to send a warning wire in 3 hours." "Yes." "Then whoever receives that wire in Cheyenne is going to send someone here." She looked at Cole. "How long?" "Fastest rider from Cheyenne is 7 hours if they leave tonight. Morning train is 6 hours. Either way, we have until morning at the earliest. Tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Briggs, I asked him to come as fast as he could move. He'll understand what that means." Cole leaned forward, with his forearms on his knees, his hat in his hands, turning it slowly, the way he did when he was working through something he hadn't resolved yet. "The problem is that Briggs arriving in Laramie at the same time as a Union Pacific representative creates a jurisdictional question that Calloway will have to untangle before anyone can touch those county records. And jurisdictional questions take time. Time that Graves can use. The preservation order limits what he can do physically. But Union Pacific has lawyers, Clara. Real ones, from Chicago and Denver, who know exactly how to file motions that slow things down long enough for evidence to become inconvenient." He met her eyes. "We need to have the complete case built before they arrive. Not a preliminary case. The whole thing, documented, sworn, entered into the court record, and sitting in front of Calloway with enough weight that no amount of lawyering from Chicago can make it look like conjecture." Clara picked up her pen. "Then I need to finish the statement tonight," she said. "All of it. Every parcel, every discrepancy, every cross-reference match. Not just the 4 I showed Calloway. All of them." She looked at him. "How many do you think there are?" "I think there are more than 4, Cole said carefully. "Based on the timeline and the scale of what we've already found, I think this has been running for at least 3 years, possibly more." "Then I need the full ledger copies from the church," she said, "tonight. Because if there are additional parcels I haven't matched yet, I need to find them before someone from Union Pacific walks into Calloway's courtroom with a lawyer who tells him my evidence is incomplete." Cole stood without being asked. "I'll go get them. The Reverend will be asleep. He'll wake up." Cole put on his hat. "Agnes." He looked at her sister, who was still standing in the doorway with the alertness of someone who had decided to stop being decorative and wasn't entirely sure yet what came next. Don't open the door for anyone tonight. If someone knocks, you don't know anything, and your father is unwell. I understand, Agnes said. He left. The sound of his boots on the front step, then the street, then gone. Agnes came fully into the back office and sat down in the chair again. She did not say anything. She picked up the stack of the filed copies Clara had set aside and began going through them in order, one by one, with the careful attention of someone who is trying to learn the shape of something new. Her fingers moved across the documents the way they'd moved across piano keys when they were children. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The numbers in the lower right corner, Agnes said after a while. The recording sequence. Yes. They should go up consistently, in order. Yes. Agnes held up 2 pages side by side. These 2 are out of sequence. The filing date on this one is 3 weeks earlier than this one, but the recording number is higher. Clara looked up from the statement she was writing. Agnes was holding a parcel deed she hadn't looked at yet. A 5th one, outside the 4 she'd shown Calloway. Set it aside, Clara said. That pile, on the right. Everything that doesn't match, on the right. Agnes began going through the copies with methodical care. Clara watched her sister's hands move across the documents and felt something shift in her chest that was too complicated to name cleanly. It had grief in it, and something that might become relief. And underneath both of those, a very old anger that was slowly, carefully, loosening its grip. They worked in silence for 40 minutes. By the time Cole came back with the church files, Agnes had found 3 additional parcels with recording sequence discrepancies. 7 total. Clara had suspected 4. Cole set the files on the desk and looked at the pile Agnes had built on the right side. She found 3 more, Clara said. Cole looked at Agnes. Agnes looked back at him with an expression that had the quality of someone who has just discovered they are capable of something they didn't know they were capable of, and is still deciding how to feel about the years during which they could have been doing it all along. Good eye, Cole said. Simply, directly, the same way he said everything. Agnes nodded once and went back to the files. Clara cross-referenced all 7 parcels against the territorial ledger. Every one of them showed the same 11-day gap. Every one of them sat along the Union Pacific corridor. Every one of them had been notarized by Burton Graves and recorded with sequential numbers that didn't match their official filing dates. She added all 7 to the sworn statement. By the time she finished the final page, it was past midnight. Her hand ached from the continuous writing, and her eyes felt the specific rawness of too many hours of small print in lamplight. She set down the pen and read through the entire statement from the beginning, correcting 2 word choices and 1 date notation that wasn't precise enough. And then she set it aside. It's done, she said. Cole had been reading through the additional files, making notes, building his own parallel documentation of the chain of ownership for each parcel. He looked up. All 7? All 7. The methodology, the cross-reference system, the discrepancy pattern, the railroad corridor connection, and the timeline. She looked at the completed pages. 12 pages. If Calloway reads it carefully, it takes about 40 minutes. If he reads it the way judges actually read things, it takes 20. She paused. But it's airtight. Anyone who goes through those numbers will reach the same conclusion. Cole stood and picked up the pages, going through them quickly with the eyes of someone who knew what a case file needed to hold up in court. He didn't read every word. He read the structure, the way a person reads a building, checking the load-bearing elements, looking for the places where something might give under pressure. His expression didn't change while he read, which Clara had come to understand meant he was concentrating, not disapproving. "This is good," he said, setting the pages down. "This is very good." "I know," she said. She wasn't being arrogant. It was just true, and they were both too tired for anything less than the plain truth. Agnes made a sound from the corner that might have been something close to a laugh. She was holding a coffee cup and watching them both with a particular expression of someone watching a conversation conducted in a language they are only beginning to understand. "What do we do in the morning?" Agnes asked. "We take the statement to Calloway first thing," Cole said, "before Graves arrives at his office, before anyone from Union Pacific gets off the morning train, before any motions get filed and any jurisdictional arguments start." He looked at Clara. "I want us on Calloway's doorstep at 7 o'clock. "He won't like being called at 7, Clara said. "He'll like it less if we wait until 9 and find out a Union Pacific attorney has already filed a motion to suppress the county records." Cole picked up his hat. "I'm going to ride by the records office on my way back to my place. Make sure Anchor's men are actually there." "You don't trust Anchor." "I trust Anchor's intentions. I'm less certain about his follow-through under pressure." He looked at her. "Get some sleep. 3 hours is better than none." "I won't sleep." "I know. Try anyway." He paused at the desk. "Clara, what you built in this office, the system, the cross-references, the methodology, it didn't happen tonight. It happened over 6 years of showing up in that back room and doing work that nobody acknowledged." He said it the way he said everything, without decoration or performance. "I want you to know that I understand that, and that the reason we have a case that will hold against Union Pacific lawyers from Chicago is because of those 6 years." Clara looked at him. She'd learned, over a very long day, that Cole Whitfield did not say things to make people feel better. He said things because they were accurate, and accuracy was what he valued most. Which meant that when he said something that happened to make her feel better, it was not because he'd intended to make her feel better. It was because it was true. "Thank you," she said. He left. The office settled into the particular quiet of very late at night. The kind of quiet that has texture to it. The sound of a town that has mostly gone to sleep, but not entirely. Agnes looked at her sister across the lamplight. "He's in love with you," she said. "He doesn't know it yet, but he is." "Agnes, I'm not wrong." Agnes set down her coffee cup with the finality of someone making a declarative statement, not inviting debate. "I have spent 6 years watching men look at women from across rooms and deciding what they thought of them in 10 seconds. He's not doing that. He's looking at you like he's still figuring out what you are. And he keeps looking because he hasn't finished yet." She tilted her head slightly. "That's different. That's the kind of looking that doesn't stop." Clara looked at the pages of the sworn statement on her desk. She thought about Cole Whitfield carrying half her files without being asked. She thought about him quoting Ruth Harmon's assessment of her, word for word. She thought about him sitting across this desk for 3 hours tonight, not talking, not hovering, just present in the specific way that some people know how to be present, as a weight that steadies rather than a pressure that crowds. She thought about Eleanor, who he had lost 4 years ago and had never fully stopped losing. "He's a man who is still grieving," she said. "I know," Agnes said. "That's not a reason it isn't true. It just means it's going to take longer." Clara picked up the statement pages and tapped them even and set them in the leather folder she used for court documents. She was not going to have this conversation tonight, because tonight she needed to sleep 3 hours, and she needed her mind to be clear at 7 in the morning when they stood on Calloway's doorstep with 12 pages of evidence that had to be stronger than whatever Union Pacific sent from Cheyenne. But she thought, before she pushed the thought aside that Agnes was probably not wrong. She thought that was probably the second most frightening thing that had happened today. She had just decided to try to sleep when her father's voice came from the back room. Not the halting nighttime voice, but the sharper one he sometimes found when something cut through the fog of his condition and made his mind work the way it used to. "Clara." She went to his door. He was sitting up in bed with a document in his lap, and she recognized it immediately. It was the original copy of the Reed Law Office's county filing authorization, the document that gave her father's practice the legal right to maintain copies of county deed records. He'd had it since 1871. She'd assumed he'd forgotten it existed. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair beside his bed. He held up the authorization documents. "This gives this practice the right to maintain official copies of county deed filings for the purpose of client representation. It was signed by Judge Harmon in 1871 and renewed every 5 years." He looked at her. "It was last renewed in 1876 by Judge Calloway." Clara was very still. "Your cross-reference files aren't unofficial," her father said. "They were never unofficial. They were maintained under the authority of this document, which means they are legally protected copies, not personal records." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 26 years. "Clara, they cannot argue your files are unauthorized, not with this document in existence." She took the authorization from his hands and read it. He was right. The language was clear and broad. Any documentation maintained by the Reed Law Office for the purpose of client deed verification was considered an official extension of the county recording system. 6 years of cross-reference files, all of them official, all of them protected, all of them admissible without qualification. "Did you know," she said carefully, "when you gave me access to the filing system, did you know this document covered whatever I built?" Her father was quiet for a moment. "I knew the document covered the filing copies," he said. "I didn't know what you'd build with access to them. I didn't—" He stopped. His right hand moved on the blanket. "I didn't look closely enough to know. That's the truth, Clara, and I'm not going to dress it up differently." She looked at the document in her hands. "This changes everything," she said. "Graves can't argue the files are unauthorized. Union Pacific can't move to suppress them on those grounds. And Calloway already renewed this authorization, so he knows exactly what it covers." "Take it with you in the morning," her father said. "Take it first, before the sworn statement. Let Calloway see it first." She looked at her father. Howard Reed, who had spent 6 years walking past the door of the back office without asking what she was doing inside it. Howard Reed, who had sent her to the back room when Cole Whitfield came through the front door. Howard Reed, who was sitting up past midnight with a document he'd had for 15 years, holding it out to his daughter because it was the right thing to do, and he had run out of reasons not to do it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, and something in his face shifted into an expression she didn't have a name for yet. She thought maybe it would take a while to develop one. She went back to her desk, added the authorization document to the leather folder, and sat for a moment in the quiet. 7 parcels, 12 pages of sworn testimony, 6 years of officially protected cross-reference files, a federal agent on his way from wherever Briggs was when Cole's wire reached him, and a county authorization document that made the entire evidentiary foundation unassailable. Burton Graves had built his scheme on the assumption that the only records that mattered were the ones he controlled. He had not counted on the woman in the back room. She closed the leather folder, turned down the lamp, and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the quiet of Laramie at 1 in the morning. The ordinary sounds of a town that did not yet know what tomorrow was going to look like. Then she heard it. Not from the street, from the alley beside the office. The specific, careful sound of someone trying very hard not to make a sound. Clara stood. She crossed to the window without touching the curtain, and looked out at the angle that let her see the alley without being visible from it. A man was crouched at the side door of the office, with something in his hands that caught the faint moonlight. Not a weapon. Something smaller, more deliberate. He was trying to pick the lock. Clara did not move toward the door. She moved toward her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and took out the small derringer her father had insisted she keep there after a client dispute had turned ugly 3 years ago. She had never fired it at anything except a fence post. Her hands were steady. She crossed to Agnes's doorway and touched her sister's shoulder once, firmly. Agnes came awake the way women who have spent years sleeping lightly come awake. Instantly, without sound. "Side door," Clara said quietly. "Someone's picking the lock. Go wake father and stay with him. Don't come out until I tell you." Agnes looked at the derringer. Something moved across her face. Fear, and underneath it something harder than fear. She nodded and was gone. Clara went to the side hallway and stood with her back against the wall beside the door, the derringer in her right hand and the leather folder pressed against her chest with her left. The folder with the sworn statement, the authorization document, everything. She heard the lock give. The door opened slowly. The man who came through was not someone she recognized. Medium height, dark coat, the particular careful movement of someone who did this professionally and understood that speed and stealth were not the same thing. He was holding a canvas satchel. He had not drawn a weapon. He was not there to hurt anyone. He was there to take the files. "Stop," Clara said. He stopped. He turned toward her voice with the practiced calm of a man who had been caught before and knew that the first 10 seconds of being caught determined everything that followed. He looked at the derringer. He looked at Clara's face. He made the calculation that experienced men make about whether the person holding the gun is willing to use it. Clara looked back at him with the steadiness of someone who has spent the last 20 hours fighting for something that matters and has run completely out of patience for people who want to take it away. "The files you're looking for are not in this office," she said. "They haven't been here since this afternoon. So whatever Mr. Graves sent you to find, you are not going to find it here." The man said nothing. He was still doing his calculation. "You have 2 choices," Clara said. "You walk back out that door and tell Mr. Graves that the Reed office had nothing. Or, I fire this weapon, wake the entire block, and you explain to Tom Anker's deputies why you were inside a private law office at 1 in the morning with a canvas satchel." She paused. "I would very much prefer the first option, but I am prepared for the second." The man looked at the derringer one more time. Then he looked at her face. He walked back out the door. Clara stood in the hallway for a full minute after the sound of his footsteps faded, breathing with controlled deliberateness, letting her heartbeat find its way back to something ordinary. Then she locked the side door, shot the bolt she should have shot 3 hours ago, and went back to her desk and sat down. Her hands were shaking slightly. She set the derringer on the desk and looked at it, and let the shaking run its course, because fighting it was a waste of energy she needed for other things. She heard the front door open and was on her feet again before she'd consciously decided to move. Cole Whitfield came through the front door with his hat off and an expression on his face that sharpened considerably when he saw her standing in the hallway with a derringer still on the desk behind her. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. "Someone came through the side door about 10 minutes ago, looking for the files. She told him the rest of it in the same order it had occurred. Cole listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was how he listened to everything important. He left. I don't think he'll come back tonight. He'll go back to Graves, and Graves will know the files aren't here. Cole was quiet for a moment. You weren't going to shoot him. I was prepared to shoot him, Clara said. There's a difference. Fair enough. He looked at the Derringer. Are you all right? Yes. She paused. My hands shook afterward. That's normal, he said. That's what hands are supposed to do afterward. He sat down across from her desk the way he'd sat for the past 3 hours, with the ease of someone who had decided this was where he was meant to be sitting. I was coming back because Anchor's men weren't at the records office. Clara stilled. What? 2 deputies were supposed to be on that building by 7 tonight. At midnight, nobody was there. I rode to find Anchor, and he told me one of his deputies had received a message saying the preservation order had been postponed, pending a procedural review. Cole's jaw was tight. There is no procedural review. Someone fabricated that message to get Anchor's men off the building. Graves, or whoever Graves is working with in the county commissioner's office. Cole leaned forward. Clara, he got to the records office tonight. He's had 3 to 4 hours with those original ledgers. The specific cold that moved through her then was not fear. It was the particular chill of understanding exactly how much damage 3 hours could do to a case built on the integrity of original documents. He can't have destroyed them, she said, working through it as she spoke. Destruction would be too obvious. If the originals disappear entirely, it confirms everything. He'd refile, alter the dates on the original entries, make the ledgers match the official filing dates instead of the sequential recording order. She looked at Cole. Which means the cross-reference files would now show a discrepancy that doesn't exist in the originals anymore, Cole said. Yes, that's the move. They looked at each other across the desk. The authorization document, Clara said. Yes. If my files are officially protected copies, made under the 1871 authorization, then any alteration to the originals after the preservation order was requested, even if the order was fraudulently delayed, constitutes tampering with protected legal documentation. She reached for the leather folder and opened it to the authorization. He didn't know about this document. Nobody outside this office knew it existed. If we can establish the timeline, when the preservation order was requested, when Anchor's men were fraudulently recalled, when Graves accessed the building, we can prove that the original ledgers were altered after the court process began. Which is obstruction of justice, Cole said. Federal charge. Which brings Briggs in with full authority, not just advisory standing. Clara closed the folder. But we need the timeline documented. Anchor's logbook, the telegraph record showing when the fraudulent message was sent, the records office entry log. She paused. And we need all of it before 7 this morning. Cole stood. I'll get Anchor moving on the logbook right now. He owes me that much, and he knows it. He stopped at the desk and looked at her directly. Clara, you have held this entire case together since 4 o'clock yesterday morning. The files, the statement, your father's document, and now this. I need you to know that what happens tomorrow works because of everything you built, not in spite of any of it. She looked back at him. Agnes's words from earlier moved through the back of her mind. He keeps looking because he hasn't finished yet. And she set them aside because there was work to do, and because some things needed the right moment, and this was not it. Go get Anchor, she said. I'll have the timeline documented before you get back. He left. She wrote. At 4 in the morning, with the timeline fully documented, and the complete case file assembled and organized in the leather folder, Clara finally allowed herself to stop. She made coffee, drank half of it, and sat in the quiet of the office where she had spent 6 years doing work that nobody looked at, and felt, for the first time and longer than she could clearly remember, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They were on Judge Calloway's doorstep at 10 minutes past 7. Calloway opened his own door in his shirt sleeves, with the expression of a man who had been awake since before they arrived, which meant someone had already told him that his preservation order had been circumvented. He looked at Clara's leather folder. He looked at Cole. He stood back from the door without speaking and let them in. The meeting took 45 minutes. Clara presented the authorization document first, the way her father had suggested. Calloway read it twice, and she watched him understand what it meant. That every file Clara had built over 6 years carried the legal weight of his own signature on the 1876 renewal. His expression when he looked up from the document was not pleased exactly, but it was the expression of a judge who has just been handed a tool he knows how to use. Then she walked him through the timeline. The fraudulent message that recalled Anker's deputies. The window in which Graves had accessed the records office. The specific nature of the alterations she expected he'd made, and why those alterations would now constitute federal obstruction rather than county record management. Calloway touched his mustache 3 times during the timeline presentation. 4 times when she laid out the authorization argument. "You're telling me," he said when she finished, "that Burton Graves, in attempting to destroy your evidence, has actually handed us a federal obstruction case that supersedes anything I could have done at the county level?" "Yes, sir," Clara said. "And you've been awake for—" He looked at the clock on his wall. "Approximately 27 hours?" "About that." Calloway looked at Cole. "Is she always like this?" "I've known her for 1 day," Cole said. "So far, yes." Calloway almost smiled. It didn't quite reach its destination, but it came close. He picked up his pen and began writing on the letterhead that meant what he was writing had the full weight of his court behind it. "I'm issuing a revised preservation order that explicitly references the authorization document and covers all Reed Law Office copies as protected legal documentation. I'm also issuing an order for the immediate inspection of the county records office, with Tom Anker and 2 federal deputies in attendance." He looked up. "Your federal agent, Briggs." "I'm expecting him on the morning train," Cole said. "Good, because what you're describing, the Union Pacific connection, the surveyor who disappeared, the coordinated suppression of county court procedure, that is not a matter this court can handle alone." Calloway signed the order and pressed his seal into the wax with the deliberate finality of a man who has made a decision and is not revisiting it. "I've been on this bench for 20 years, and I have never issued a preservation order that was circumvented within 12 hours. He handed the document to Clara directly. Not to Cole, to Clara. "See that this doesn't happen to the next one." "Yes, sir," she said. Federal Agent Briggs arrived on the 10 o'clock train. He was a compact, gray-haired man with the economical movements of someone who had been doing difficult work in difficult places for a long time and had learned to conserve everything except attention. He shook Cole's hand with the ease of old colleagues. He shook Clara's hand and then held it for a moment while he looked at her, the way a person looks when they are matching a reputation to a face. "The cross-reference system," he said. "Cole's wires said you'd built a parallel filing record for 6 years." "Yes, sir." "Under the 1871 authorization." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I've been trying to build a case against Union Pacific's land acquisition practices for 2 years. The problem has always been the county records. They look clean from the outside." He looked at the leather folder under her arm. "You're telling me they don't look clean from inside?" "I'm telling you they are demonstrably not clean, with documentation going back 3 years and a methodology that will hold in federal court." She met his eyes. And I'm telling you that the man responsible tried to break into this office at 1 in the morning to take the files. And when that failed, he spent 3 hours altering the original county ledgers to make my copies look like forgeries." Briggs was very still for a moment. "He altered federal adjacent records after a court process had been initiated?" "Yes, sir." "That," Briggs said quietly, "is the kind of mistake that ends careers." He looked at Cole. "Let's go see Judge Calloway." The inspection of the county records office happened at 2 in the afternoon. Clara was there. Cole was there. Briggs was there with 2 federal deputies. Tom Anker was there, with the determined expression of a man who had been made a fool of, and was not going to let that be the last thing on record about him. Burton Graves was there too, because Tom Anker had gone to his house at noon and informed him, in terms that left no room for misinterpretation, that his presence was required. Graves had brought a lawyer from Cheyenne, a polished, expensive man who had clearly arrived on the same morning train as Briggs and had spent the intervening hours preparing arguments. He began presenting those arguments the moment Briggs opened the first ledger. He stopped presenting them 12 minutes later, when Clara opened the leather folder, placed her cross-reference files beside the original ledger, and showed Briggs, page by page, every place where the original entries had been altered to match the official filing dates. The alterations were careful. They were professionally done, but they had been made over 3 to 4 hours by a man working alone under time pressure, and they were not as invisible as Burton Graves had believed they would be. Because Clara's cross-reference system didn't just record the dates, it recorded the ink composition notation she'd developed over 6 years of handling these documents, a personal shorthand she'd used to track document aging and authenticity for her own verification purposes. Nobody had known she was doing it. She had done it because it was the thorough thing to do. The altered entries were written in fresh ink. The lawyer from Cheyenne stopped talking and looked at his client. Burton Graves looked at the open ledger, at the cross-reference files laid beside it, at the fresh ink notations that Clara's 6-year methodology had made inescapable. And his face went through several things quickly before settling into the gray stillness of a man who understands that the architecture he built his certainty on has just come down around him. He looked at Clara. She looked back at him. She did not feel triumph exactly. She felt the specific clarity of a thing that is finished, the way a sum feels when the final column adds up exactly right, and there is no longer any question about what the numbers say. "Mr. Graves," Briggs said. His voice was conversational, almost gentle, the way very experienced men sound when they are stating something that doesn't require emphasis. "I think we should sit down." The full accounting took 3 weeks. 7 fraudulent deed transfers. $42,000 in fraudulent proceeds. Burton Graves and 2 Union Pacific land agents, whose names had appeared in a series of correspondence that Briggs's office found in Graves's home. The surveyor named Decker, located in Salt Lake City, who had been waiting for 2 years for the moment when cooperating with federal investigators was safer than staying quiet, and whose testimony filled in the last gaps in the connection between the county records office and the railroad company's advanced knowledge of its own route. The Patterson deed, the one Cole had paid $400 for, was restored. His land was clear. Howard Reed's law office was not only intact, but had been formally commended by Judge Calloway's court for the role its documentation system had played in uncovering a multi-year fraud scheme. The commendation used Clara's name. It used it twice. Agnes Reed began learning the deed filing system on a Monday morning in April, sitting at the second desk that Cole Whitfield had brought from the Harmon Creek Ranch property and carried into the back office without being asked. She was slower than Clara, and she knew it, and she did not pretend otherwise. But she showed up every morning, and she stayed until the work was done, and by the end of the first month, She had started catching things that Clara's eye had skimmed past. "You have good instincts," Clara told her one evening, going through the day's files. Agnes looked up. "I have adequate instincts," she said, with the particular honesty she'd been practicing since the night she'd decided to stop managing what people saw and start seeing things herself. "You have exceptional ones. I'm trying to learn the difference." Clara accepted that. It was true, and Agnes had earned the right to say it plainly. On a Thursday evening in late April, Cole Whitfield came by the office after the day's work was finished, the way he had been doing with increasing regularity since the investigation had concluded. He sat across from Clara's desk, and they talked about the Harmon Creek property, which needed a functioning deed review done for the spring title transfer. And then they stopped talking about the Harmon Creek property and sat in the comfortable quiet that had built itself between them over weeks of shared purpose and honest conversation. "Ruth Harmon asked me yesterday," Cole said, "what my intentions were." Clara looked up from the file she was closing. "What did you tell her?" "I told her my intentions were to ask you a question, and that the answer depended on you." He was turning his hat in his hands, the way he did when he was working through something. And she had come to know, in the weeks since the investigation, that this particular movement meant he had already worked through the thing and was now in the separate, harder business of saying it. "I spent 4 years after Eleanor died convincing myself that building something alone was the responsible choice, that wanting something for myself was a luxury I'd already used." He looked at her steadily. "I was wrong about that. I was wrong in the specific way that people are wrong when they're afraid, and calling it principle." Clara set down the file. "I'm not looking for someone to take care of," he said. "I'm not looking for someone who needs me to make sense of things. I know what you're capable of. I watched you build a federal case in a single day with 6 years of work nobody knew existed, and a derringer you were prepared but not eager to use." Something that was close to a smile moved across his face. "I'm not under any illusions about who would be taking care of whom in this arrangement." "Then what are you asking?" Clara said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to find out what building something together looks like," he said. "Not because you need a partner, and not because I need one. Because we both chose to keep showing up to something that was hard, and the choosing mattered. And I don't want to stop choosing." He held her gaze without looking away. "That's what I want. If you want something different, I'd rather know now than later." Clara looked at Cole Whitfield, who had walked into her father's office one morning, looking for someone who could read the evidence he couldn't prove alone, who had carried her files without being asked, who had sat across this desk for 3 hours without making it about himself, who had looked at her with the specific, sustained attention of a man who was still figuring out what she was, and had kept looking because he hadn't finished. She thought about the 6 years she'd spent in this office, doing work that mattered in a space where it didn't count. She thought about what it had taken to stop waiting for someone to notice the back room and simply open the door herself. She thought about the 11-day gap in Burton Graves's records that he had never imagined anyone would find, and about the woman who had been finding things like that for 6 years because thoroughness was its own reason, because the work was worth doing whether or not anyone was watching. Because some people build things carefully and completely in the quiet and the dark, and trust that the truth of what they've built will eventually matter to someone. It had. "Yes," Clara said. She said it the same way she said everything that was simply, plainly true, without decoration, without qualification, without waiting to see if he would soften the moment into something easier than it was. He did not soften it. He looked at her across the desk with the steady, clear-eyed recognition of a man who has just been told something real and knows how to receive it. Outside, Laramie went about its ordinary evening business, indifferent to the particular thing that had just been decided in the back office of the Reed law practice. The territory was full of land and ordinary struggle, and the slow, unglamorous work of building something in difficult country with imperfect tools. It always had been. Clara Reed had spent 6 years in this office doing invisible work that turned out to matter more than anything anyone had asked of her. She had built a case that brought down a county clerk and reached the hand of a railroad company and gave 12 honest families their land back. She had done it with ink and paper, and the kind of careful, sustained attention that most people mistake for small work, until the moment when small work turns out to be the only work that holds. She had done it because it was right, because thoroughness was its own reward, because the truth of a well-kept ledger doesn't ask for an audience. It simply is. Clara Reed had never needed anyone to notice the back room to know her work was worth doing. She had simply kept doing it, year after year, in the quiet and the lamplight, until the day the work walked in the front door and finally asked for her by name.